Around 12,000 to 9,000 BCE, time before counting, when movement followed water and season. Around 12,000 to 9,000 BCEA, time before counting, when movement followed water and season. Before cities, there were no fixed places. Movement followed water, plants, and animals. Paths shifted, camps dissolved and reformed. Nothing remained long enough to require permanence. The land did not belong to anyone. It was crossed, paused upon, and left behind. Rivers marked direction, not boundary. Hills offered shelter, not ownership. Time was not counted. It was noticed. Light changed, air cooled, rain arrived and withdrew. These patterns repeated without names. Groups stayed together while conditions allowed it. When resources thinned, they separated. Rejoining was expected. Separation was not loss. Tools were carried lightly, stone, bone, wood. Objects served a purpose and were abandoned when no longer useful. Accumulation created burden, not security. Fire was maintained rather than controlled. It moved with the group. Warmth and cooking shaped evenings, but not structure. Speech described immediate experience. Instruction happened through demonstration. Memory resided in bodies rather than objects. There were no schedules. Activity followed opportunity. Hunger prompted movement. Fatigue prompted rest. The rivers flooded beyond expectation. Water spread across wide plains, then receded. What remained nourished plants and animals alike. Humans followed what returned. Knowledge developed through repetition. Where animals crossed, where water lingered, which plants reappeared. Nothing required record keeping. Nothing demanded storage beyond the moment. Life adjusted continuously, without accumulation. This world did not feel temporary. It felt sufficient. Gradually, pauses lengthened. Certain places drew repeated return. River bends, marsh edges, elevated ground that remained dry after floods. These returns were not planned. They emerged through familiarity. The land became recognizable. Seasonal rhythm grew clearer. Cold periods passed, warmth returned. Animals migrated predictably. Plants reappeared where water had rested. Waiting became possible. Observation deepened. Groups lingered longer where resources overlapped. Fishing coincided with gathering. Hunting routes intersected with plant cycles. Shelter improved slightly. Windbreaks lasted a season. Hearths were reused. Ash accumulated. Objects began to remain in place. Tools were left behind with the expectation of return. This was not ownership. It was anticipation. Time stretched. Days became less urgent. Movement slowed. Children grew within familiar surroundings. Adults aged without relocating constantly. Recognition extended across years rather than weeks. Memory expanded quietly, not as history, but as expectation. The land itself became a reference, not measured, not mapped, but known. There were still no boundaries, still no names carved into place, but attachment formed through repetition. Nothing yet resembled settlement. Nothing required organization beyond cooperation. This was not a beginning. It was a deepening. Stillness increased without intention. The rivers continued to flow. People continued to follow. Change arrived without announcement. Around 9,000 to 6,500 BCE, planting, waiting, and the first quiet trust in cycles. Waiting began to change. Some seeds were no longer only gathered. They were placed, pressed into soil, covered and left behind. This act did not replace movement immediately. It added pause to it. People remained nearby to observe what followed. Shoots emerged where seeds had rested. Growth followed moisture and light. Failure followed dryness or cold. The outcome was uncertain, but repeatable. The same locations were used again. Soil was loosened by hand. Stones were cleared. Simple tools extended fingers rather than replaced them. Planting followed seasonal signals. Floodwaters withdrew. Ground softened. Temperature shifted. Time began to gather shape around these moments. Before planting, after harvest, between growth and rest, the land responded unevenly. Some plots produced more, others failed without clear reason. Observation increased, adjustments followed. Seeds from successful plants were kept, not stored indefinitely, saved with intention. This practice required memory. Which patch, which timing, which plant. Movement slowed further. Groups remained longer near prepared ground. Travel narrowed to familiar routes. Work repeated without urgency. Planting required patience more than strength. Waiting required restraint. Harvest did not guarantee abundance. It offered consistency. Food lasted slightly longer, into dry periods. Loss was spread rather than concentrated. Life remained fragile, but fragility became expected rather than surprising. These changes did not announce themselves. They accumulated quietly. People were still mobile, still responsive, still unbound. But time had begun to return on itself. Seasonal awareness deepened. Cold and warmth were anticipated. Rain was watched for. Dryness was endured with preparation rather than movement alone. Calendars did not exist. Memory provided sequence. The year became familiar without being measured. Tasks aligned with environmental rhythm. Clearing followed flooding. Planting followed cooling. Harvest followed ripening. Idle periods appeared. Waiting was no longer absence of work. It was part of it. Shelters remained in place longer. Storage pits appeared. Grain was protected from moisture and animals. This required trust that return would occur, trust that waiting would be rewarded. Communal effort increased. Fields were prepared together. Harvest required multiple hands. Timing mattered. Disagreements occurred. Resolution favored continuation. Abandonment risked loss. Children learned seasonal patterns early. Observation preceded instruction. Repetition formed understanding. Tools diversified slightly. Sickles appeared. Grinding stones remained nearby. Objects stayed where they were used. Movement became selective. The landscape changed subtly. Clearings expanded. Paths stabilized. Familiarity replaced exploration. This was not settlement yet. Absence was still possible. Departure still occurred. But return became expected. Seasonal time shaped attention. Planning emerged without abstraction. Memory extended across years. The land was no longer only followed. It was awaited. Nothing here required authority. Coordination emerged through shared dependence. The future became shorter and clearer. Not imagined far ahead, anticipated within cycles. Life remained close to uncertainty, but uncertainty now had rhythm. Time had entered the ground. Around 6,500 to 5,000 BCE, vessels, hearths, and daily life gaining form. Clay was already present. It lined riverbanks. It gathered in low places after floods. At first, it was incidental. Mud dried on skin. it cracked in the sun. Gradually, it was handled with intention. Clay was pressed, folded, turned. Moisture was adjusted by touch rather than measure. Texture guided form. Simple shapes appeared, shallow bowls, thick-walled vessels, objects meant to remain. Drying took time. Pieces were protected from wind and rain. Breakage was common. Success was partial. Fire hardened what air could not. Heat transformed softness into durability. Timing mattered. Excess cracked surfaces. Insufficient heat left forms weak. These objects were not decorative. They were functional, holding water, storing grain, supporting cooking. Pottery reduced daily effort. Liquids traveled farther. Food lasted longer. Preparation became more predictable. Hands learned repetition. The same motions returned. The same failures were corrected slowly. Knowledge transferred by observation. No instruction was formal. Presence was sufficient. Pottery did not replace movement. It anchored it. Objects accumulated gradually, not in excess, in use. Clay made waiting easier. Storage extended seasons. Cooking softened diets. Daily routines thickened. Tasks layered rather than replaced one another. Life did not become easier. It became steadier. Nothing required planning beyond repetition. The ground provided both material and meaning. Change remained quiet. Pottery altered attention. Care was required. Vessels broke if mishandled. Storage demanded protection. Spaces adjusted around objects. Shelters accommodated storage. Hearths stabilized in place. Movement slowed further. Certain items were not easily carried. Return became preferable to departure. Meals gained rhythm. Preparation followed sequence. Water was collected and held. Ingredients combined and cooked. Food sharing changed. Portions became consistent. Timing aligned across households. Children learned through use. Hands touched clay early. Fragility taught care. Waste decreased. Containers preserved surplus. Loss became gradual rather than sudden. Trade remained minimal. Objects were made locally. Familiar forms repeated. The landscape showed subtle permanence. Ash layers thickened. Broken pottery accumulated. Discarded pieces marked occupation, not ownership, presence. Clay recorded routine without intention. Layers formed without design. This material held time differently. It remained where it broke. It did not return to soil quickly. Memory extended into space. No authority emerged from this. No hierarchy formed. Pottery supported daily life, not control. But dependence increased. Storage required return. Cooking required place. Attachment deepened without declaration. The household became clearer, not defined by walls, but by repeated activity. Daily life acquired edges. Nothing here created cities. Nothing demanded leadership. But continuity strengthened. Time pressed gently into form. Around 5000 BCE, water did not remain where it fell. Seasonal floods spread across low ground. They withdrew slowly. Moisture lingered unevenly. Some soil stayed dark and soft. Other ground dried quickly. Early cultivation followed these differences. It did not correct them. Shallow channels appeared first, without plan. Water traced paths of least resistance. Small grooves formed along slopes. Over many seasons, hands cleared these grooves. Sediment was lifted out. Banks were shaped and packed. The channels did not redirect rivers. they extended them. Water entered fields at a measured pace. Flow was judged by sight and sound. If water moved too quickly, earth collapsed. If it moved too slowly, plants weakened. Balance was learned by repetition. By the later centuries of the 5th millennium, BCE, maintenance had become routine. Channels filled with silt each season, plants rooted along their edges, animals disturbed the walls. Clearing returned year after year. Each clearing resembled the one before it. Work was shared, tasks repeated across households. Timing mattered more than speed. Preparation came before floods arrived. No single person controlled water. Access depended on coordination. Shared effort sustained shared ground. Fields yielded more reliably. Loss became manageable. Irrigation lengthened productive time. Growth stabilized. Change accumulated quietly. Across generations, water became predictable, without becoming owned. Between 5000 and 4000 BCE, movement adjusted. Fields clustered near channels. Shelters aligned with access points. Paths followed embankments. The land began to show pattern. Coordination required attention. Channels opened and closed in sequence. Clearing followed seasonal cycles. The same work, the same order. Disputes occurred. Resolution favored continuity. Abandonment risked shared loss. Regularity increased. Days filled with familiar tasks. Work became expected, not reactive. Water introduced pauses. Flow moved slowly through channels. Visible, audible. Movement marked time. Children learned by watching. Adults repeated technique without explanation. Knowledge persisted through continuity. Over many cycles, channels deepened slightly. Their courses stabilized. The land became readable. These systems required agreement, not authority. Maintenance depended on shared interest. By the later part of the 4th millennium BCE, larger channels linked multiple fields. Dependency widened. Memory no longer held every sequence. Simple markers appeared along channels. Nothing permanent, nothing written. The land itself carried record. Through water, repetition gained structure. Labor remained physical. Coordination remained quiet. No institutions yet, no offices. But conditions had formed. Shared labor reshaped expectation. Around 4000 BCE, settlement began to thicken. Houses gathered closer to water, paths narrowed, movement slowed. What had been clusters became neighborhoods. Fields lay farther from homes. Daily travel increased. Storage moved inward. Grain was no longer kept only at the edge of fields. It entered shared spaces, rooms set aside for holding. Population rose gradually, not suddenly. More people meant more coordination. Water schedules overlapped. Access required order. By 3800 BCE, some settlements held several thousand people. Uruk expanded along canal lines. So did Eridu. So did Ur. Walls did not appear yet. Boundaries remained open, but density changed sound. Footsteps overlapped. Voices carried shorter distances. Work specialized quietly. Some shaped clay, some wove reed, some measured grain. Exchange increased. Barter remained local. Movement remained slow. Evenings compressed. Light clustered. Smoke rose thicker. The settlement no longer slept as one. Time felt different inside density. Days shortened. Rhythms layered. The village became something else. Not yet a city, but no longer only a settlement. By 3500 BCE, Uruk crossed a threshold. Its population exceeded 30,000. Space reorganized. Canals divided districts. Paths followed water. Movement became directional. Public buildings appeared, larger than homes, raised slightly above ground. Platforms of packed earth and brick, visible from a distance. These structures were not palaces. They were not houses. They gathered people, stored goods, marked time. Temples rose gradually, expanded through rebuilding. The Iana precinct grew layer by layer, each phase covering the one before. Labor organized without command. Work followed expectation. Clay tablets appeared, simple marks, tallies, grain in, grain out. Writing began as memory assistance, not literature. The wheel turned in workshops, the true wheel, spinning clay. Transport followed. Carts replaced carrying. Speed increased slightly. Effort redistributed. By 3200 BCE, Uruk influenced distant regions. Styles spread, techniques traveled. Yet the city remained quiet at night. Oil lamps flickered. Footsteps softened. Uruk was large, but it breathed slowly. The city had formed, not through decree, through accumulation. Around 3300 BCE, memory reached its limit. Grain moved in volume, labor crossed districts, obligations overlapped. Spoken recall was no longer enough. Clay answered this pressure. Small tablets were formed by hand, soft, flat, easy to hold. Marks were pressed with reed tips, simple impressions, lines, wedges. These marks did not represent speech. They represented things: barley, sheep, oil, days. A tablet might record rations, another listed deliveries, another tracked labor time. Nothing decorative, nothing expressive. Writing began as accounting. Tablets dried in the sun. Some cracked, some survived. Errors were corrected by smoothened clay. Records were rewritten. Scribes learned through repetition. Hands memorized motion. Eyes followed spacing. Writing slowed action. It forced sequence. It required pause. Through marks, events gained order. Clay became memory. By 3100 BCE, scribes formed a distinct role. They were trained. They practiced daily. Learning began with lists, animals, plants, tools. Order mattered more than meaning. Signs became standardized, angles fixed, spacing consistent. Cuneiform took shape. Writing spread beyond grain. Names appeared, places, dates. Time entered record. Tablets moved into storage rooms, shelves of packed earth. Rooms kept dry. Archives formed unintentionally. One tablet beside another, then another. Administration grew quietly. No proclamations, no announcements. Power flowed through record, not voice. Those who wrote controlled sequence. Those who read controlled memory. Yet writing remained practical. No poetry yet, no epics, only work made visible. By 3000 BCE, cities depended on clay. The city spoke through tablets, and clay answered back with permanence. Around 3000 BCE, authority began to settle into place. Cities had grown dense, population pressed inward. Goods moved constantly, water flowed through long channels, coordination became continuous work. Certain individuals emerged through practice. They organized labor, they scheduled water release, they oversaw storage. Their authority developed slowly, season by season, year by year. These figures did not rule by distance. They remained visible. They walked canals. They inspected storehouses. They listened. Their role was functional: resolve disputes, maintain balance, prevent loss. Titles appeared in records: Ensi Lugal, words tied to place, words tied to responsibility. Power remained local, bound to city and field. Temples continued to anchor authority. Ritual and record intertwined. Offerings passed through temple courts. Grain redistributed. Labor assigned. Kingship layered onto community. It did not replace it. Decisions favored precedent. What had worked before was repeated. Stability mattered more than ambition. The city required reliability, not spectacle. Authority became a rhythm, predictable, maintained. By 2900 BCE, kingship became visible across southern Mesopotamia. Names entered tablets, projects were attributed, accounts recorded outcomes, walls rose around cities, not only for defense, for definition. Uruk enclosed itself, Lagash followed, Kish marked its boundary, walls shaped movement, entry slowed, exit narrowed. Inside, districts formed. The king stood as mediator, between people, between gods. He was not divine, he was accountable. Failure brought hunger, success brought regularity. Inscriptions remained brief, practical, unadorned. A canal was cleared, a temple roof repaired, grain weighed and issued. Administration outweighed ceremony. Violence existed, raids occurred, conflicts flared, but daily order mattered more. Guards walked at night, torches low, steps measured. The king slept within the walls, not above them, not apart. Authority rested on function. If canals held, if grain moved, if peace endured, then rule remained. Around 2800 BCE, cities began to press against one another. Canals extended outward, fields overlapped, boundaries blurred. What had once been distance became contact. Cities shared rivers, they shared floodplains, they shared risk. Disputes arose over water timing, over field access, over damaged embankments. Record replaced memory. Tablets preserved claims. Older entries carried weight. Messengers travelled between cities, walking narrow paths, carrying clay. Negotiation preceded conflict, but agreement did not always hold. Raids occurred, short, targeted. Grain stores were seized, livestock driven away. Violence remained limited, seasonal, measured. Walls mattered now. Gates closed earlier. Watchposts multiplied. Weapons stayed simple. Spears, shields, slings. Conflict disrupted routine, but did not erase it. Between confrontations, fields were worked. Canals cleared. Life continued. Expansion was cautious, slow, calculated. No city sought total control, only security. Power tested its edges. By 2600 BCE, cities looked outward. Resources within the alluvium were limited. Stone was scarce, timber distant, metal rare. Trade routes extended. Caravans moved north and east. Donkeys carried copper, shell, obsidian. Ports along the Gulf opened. Boats followed the coast. Contacts widened. Expansion did not mean occupation. It meant connection. Influence travelled with objects. Seal designs, pottery forms, weights. Diplomacy emerged through exchange. Yet power travelled with arms as well. Some cities subdued neighbours. Tribute followed victory. Names of defeated towns entered records. Listed, counted. Victory was described briefly. No celebration. only outcome. Conflict refined organization, logistics improved, supply lines mattered, campaigns were short, timed between planting and harvest. Leaders learned limits. Overextension risked collapse. The plain resisted domination. Rivers constrained movement. Floods erased roads. Expansion taught restraint. Power grew, but remained tethered. The city extended its reach without losing its center. Around 2700 BCE, names began to last longer than lives. Some rulers were remembered, others were not. What endured was not accuracy, but repetition. Stories traveled by voice, carried across courtyards, repeated at night. They described strength, loss, limits. Heroes were not distant figures. They were close to the land, close to the city. One name surfaced often, spoken more than written, adjusted with each telling: Gilgamesh. He was described as king, as builder, as challenger. His city had walls, strong ones, measured ones. The walls mattered more than the man. Stories placed him between worlds, between human effort and divine boundary. These accounts were not history. They were memory shaped by need. Listeners did not seek truth. They sought recognition. The stories explained power. They explained grief. They explained why life did not last. They were told slowly, repeated deliberately. No single version existed. Meaning settled through variation. Through story, experience gained form. By 2400 BCE, some stories were pressed into clay. Words fixed what voices had carried. Tablets recorded fragments, scenes, episodes. The order varied. The message remained. Kingship had limits. Strength faded. Friends were lost. The natural world resisted control. Floods returned. Forests ended. Death arrived. These were not warnings. They were acknowledgements. Writing preserved them, not to teach, but to hold. Scribes copied carefully, line by line, mistakes corrected. The act of copying mattered as much as the content. Memory became portable. Stories crossed generations intact. They did not change behavior. They softened understanding. People listened and recognized themselves. Epic did not replace labor. It accompanied it. Fields were still worked. Canals maintained. Markets opened, but now, at the edge of the day, words remained. History did not sleep, it listened. Through repetition, the past stayed near, not as record, as presence. Around 1800 BCE, order began to stand in place. Not spoken, not remembered only by voice, seen. Stone held words that did not move. They were placed where people passed, near gates, near temples, near markets. People encountered them without stopping, day after day, season after season. These words described behavior, boundaries, consequences. They were not written for reflection. They were written for repetition. Law did not appear suddenly. Custom already existed. Judgment was familiar. Disputes had always been settled. Debts had always been weighed. Injury had always required response. What changed was permanence. Decisions were no longer only recalled, they were displayed. Displayed meant remembered even when memory failed. People passed them daily, stopped briefly, moved on. Most could not read them. That was not required. The presence mattered. Stone did not argue, it waited. Law was not gentle, it was regular. It did not ask intention, it recorded outcome. Damage required repair, debt required settlement. Disorder required response. These expectations repeated until they felt natural. Children grew up beneath them. Adults aged beside them. The city absorbed them without discussion. This system reduced uncertainty, not conflict. People still argued, still failed, still lost, but expectations stabilized. The city learned what followed what. Predictability became security. Routine deepened. Over the years that followed, law settled into daily movement. By this time, Babylon had weight. Walls enclosed it. Canals fed it. Trade passed through it. Law supported rhythm. Markets opened at familiar hours. Weights were checked. Measures compared. Agreements were spoken with reference already assumed. Contracts formed slowly, pressed into clay, stored. Disputes moved toward procedure. Witnesses mattered. Records mattered. Memory shifted again. Clay tablets multiplied. Cases were noted. Outcomes repeated. The same situations returned. The same resolutions followed. Justice became less personal, more consistent. Not fair, but stable. Stability reduced hesitation. People planned with caution, but they planned. Families extended across generations. Property endured. Inheritance followed pattern. Authority no longer relied on presence. It relied on reference. A judge did not invent response. He confirmed it. The law did not sleep. It waited. People adjusted behavior quietly, not through fear, but familiarity. Rules shaped attention. Order did not remove hardship. It distributed it. Loss became predictable. Recovery became possible. Life remained fragile, but its limits were named. The city exhaled. Routine held. Stone remained. Around 2300 BCE, authority began to travel. Not by voice, not by memory alone, by record. Cities were no longer isolated rhythms, they were linked. Roads were walked repeatedly. Messengers moved between places. Tablets changed hands. This was not sudden conquest. It was accumulation. One city influenced another, then another. Leadership extended outward, without leaving home. Orders were sent, responses returned. Distance did not disappear, it became managed. Names began to repeat across regions. Sargon, Akkad. Power gathered through coordination, not presence. Local routines continued. Fields were planted, canals cleared, but outcomes were now reported. Grain totals moved upward. Labor counts followed. Administration layered itself over daily life, not replacing it, tracking it. The empire did not feel large from the ground. Life remained local, but reference extended far. As years passed within the Akkadian span, management became the work. Officials were appointed, standards repeated, weights aligned, measures agreed upon. Language stabilized across tablets. Signs became familiar. This reduced friction. Trade moved more smoothly. Resources redistributed. The empire depended on routine. When routine failed, distance revealed weakness. Communication slowed. Delays mattered. Droughts disrupted supply. Rebellions followed disruption. Power required maintenance, like canals. Clearing was constant. When attention faltered, control thinned. Eventually, cohesion weakened. Cities resumed independence quietly. Administration withdrew without ceremony. The empire did not collapse loudly, it loosened. Local life persisted. Fields were replanted, canals reopened. What remained was experience, the idea that distance could be held through record and repetition, that memory could travel. This lesson stayed. It would be used again. Around 2100 BCE, attention returned inward. After periods of distance and loosened control, order rebuilt itself through proximity. Became a center again, not through conquest, through organization. Walls were repaired, canals cleared, temple schedules resumed. Nothing radically new appeared. What had worked before was repeated. The third dynasty of formed gradually. Authority settled into procedure rather than display. Officials counted grain. Labor was assigned by season. Payments followed predictable intervals. Clay tablets multiplied, each one small, each one exact. Names appeared again and again. Occupations stabilized. Households became legible. This was not expansion, it was refinement. Administration aligned with daily rhythm, not above it. Farmers worked fields as they always had, but outcomes were now expected. Returns were anticipated. Predictability returned. The year could be read. Within this period, law did not announce itself loudly. It preserved balance. Around the same time, Ur-Nammu's law code appeared. Short statements, clear outcomes, fines rather than violence, restoration rather than spectacle. Justice moved through record, not performance. Disputes ended earlier, resolution followed precedent. Temples coordinated relief. Grain was redistributed. The state functioned as caretaker. Daily life continued without disruption. Children learned routine before theory. Work followed expectation. Time felt steady again, not rigid, reliable. Harvest stabilized. Administration blended into habit. Order did not demand attention. It repeated. As decades passed, stability became assumed. Archives grew dense. Scribes copied lists. Nothing poetic. But precision created calm. The city slept with confidence. When the dynasty ended, it ended gently. Systems dissolved into local use, but knowledge remained. It was remembered that order could be quiet, that structure could rest beside routine, that continuity did not need force. Around 1800 BCE, Babylon rested along the Euphrates. It did not rise suddenly, it accumulated. Water moved past its banks each season, sometimes high, sometimes restrained. The river was not redirected dramatically, it was guided, maintained, observed. Fields extended outward in narrow bands, canals connected them quietly. Maintenance occurred without announcement. Babylon learned balance before dominance. People arrived gradually. Some stayed, some moved on. Those who stayed adjusted routines. Work followed familiar cycles. Markets opened and closed without urgency. The city did not overwhelm its surroundings. It absorbed them. Streets widened slowly. Housing thickened near water access. Movement became predictable. Temples did not dominate daily life. They structured it. Offerings repeated. Festivals returned on schedule. Absence was noticed. Administration followed settlement. Not the other way around. Grain was measured, livestock counted, storehouses inspected, records accumulated. Through repetition, not innovation, Babylon became reliable. Merchants paused longer, agreements lasted, debts were tracked. The city's value lay in consistency. Nothing needed to be rushed. Time passed evenly here. Memory thickened in place. Babylon learned how to hold people without exhausting land or water. It became a place where things stayed. Within this settled rhythm, authority took form. Hammurabi ruled during this period, around 1750 BCE. His presence was not constant. His decisions needed endurance. Law moved outward from the palace, not as command but as reference. The code was not narrative. It did not persuade, it listed outcomes. If a boundary was crossed, a consequence followed. If damage occurred, repair or penalty applied. Stone was chosen deliberately. Clay could crack, memory could drift. Stone remained. The law did not remove hierarchy, it formalized it. Different people faced different outcomes for similar acts. This was accepted as structure. What mattered was predictability. Conflict no longer expanded freely. It narrowed toward resolution. Judgment shifted from debate to consultation. Daily life adjusted subtly. People paused before action. Consequences were known. Trade stabilized further. Loans followed terms. Disputes ended sooner. The code reduced uncertainty without removing hardship. Scribes copied the law. Judges referenced it. Officials enforced it unevenly, but consistently enough. Authority became less personal. The ruler did not need to intervene constantly. The law remained visible. When Hammurabi's reign ended, the stone endured. Babylon changed hands. Power shifted. But the idea persisted. That behavior could be anticipated. That time could be ordered. That stability could be externalized. Law became part of the environment, like canals, like walls, like the river itself. Babylon rested beneath written order. After 1800 BCE, the land between rivers was no longer quiet. It was not unstable, but it was watched. Beyond Babylon, other powers gathered shape. To the north and west, the Mitanni formed. They were not centered on cities alone. They moved through territory. Horses mattered here, movement mattered. Chariots crossed open land. Messengers traveled faster than before. Authority stretched through distance, not density. Treaties replaced conquest in many places. Marriage joined courts. Oaths traveled farther than armies. Power learned restraint. To the northwest, the Hittites expanded. They crossed mountains. They absorbed cities. Iron appeared gradually, not as revolution, as addition. Weapons lasted longer. Tools held edge. States tested one another without total collapse. Assyria remained present, waiting. Its cities endured quietly. Its administration stayed intact. The rivers continued to flow, but attention moved outward. The world widened. Between 1600 and 1200 BCE, balance shifted repeatedly. Mitanni influence weakened. Hittite control fluctuated. Assyria remained. It did not expand quickly. It consolidated. Records were kept carefully, tribute tracked, boundaries noted. Military force existed, but was organized methodically. Campaigns followed seasons. Supply mattered as much as strength. Cities were incorporated, not erased. Administration followed conquest immediately. Order was imposed before resistance returned. Assyria learned endurance. Its power did not rely on moment. It relied on continuity. The state remembered. By 1200, BCE, older balances fractured. Trade routes broke, cities thinned. Assyria persisted through structure. When others fell silent, its records continued. The rivers did not change. The land did not disappear. Power contracted, then reformed. This was not an ending. It was compression. The region held its breath. By around 600 BCE, Babylon returned to prominence. It did not appear new, it felt resumed. Older foundations were reused. Earlier routes were followed. The Euphrates still passed its walls, steady and unchanged. Nebuchadnezzar ruled during this time. His reign extended order rather than invention. The city expanded outward and upward. Walls thickened, gates aligned. Movement was controlled gently, not restricted, directed. Canals were repaired, bridges reinforced. Water moved where it was expected to move. The city held population with confidence. Markets repeated daily rhythm. Merchants returned predictably. Craft production increased. Brick-making continued. Glazed surfaces appeared. Color entered public space without excess. Temples were restored. Rituals resumed. Time returned to schedule. Babylon became legible again. People understood where to go, what to do, when to wait. The city did not rush, it stood. Nebuchadnezzar's authority was visible. Buildings carried intention. Walls did not only defend, they reassured. Processional routes widened. Ceremony slowed movement. The Ishtar Gate marked passage without explanation. Gardens were spoken of, described, remembered. Whether exact or symbolic, they represented cultivation within enclosure. Order extended into display. Astronomy mattered. From rooftops, priests observed stars. Patterns were recorded. Cycles compared. Time was tracked carefully. The future was anticipated through repetition. Power extended beyond the city. Campaigns occurred. Territories were held. Jerusalem fell. Populations moved. Exile was structured, not chaotic. Administration followed displacement. Records were kept. Babylon absorbed difference. Languages overlapped. Customs remained distinct. The city functioned as container. After Nebuchadnezzar's death, control weakened. Rivals watched. The city remained, but momentum slowed. Walls endured. Records remained. Babylon waited. By around 550 BCE, Babylon did not fall violently. It opened. Cyrus of Persia entered the city without breaking its rhythm. Temples remained standing. Rituals continued. The river was not redirected. The calendar was not erased. Rule changed hands, but daily life held its shape. Cyrus governed through continuation. Local administrators remained in place. Priests kept authority over ritual. Farmers followed the same seasons. Taxes were measured carefully, not increased suddenly. The empire expanded outward, but pressure moved evenly. From Anatolia to the Iranian plateau, from the Indus to the Aegean, lands were linked rather than compressed. Roads formed gradually. Messages traveled on schedules. Stations appeared at intervals. Movement became reliable. Law was plural. Customs remained local. Language varied. The empire did not require sameness. It required order. Cyrus framed authority as restoration. Exiles returned home. Sanctuaries reopened. Memory was honored. Power was present, but it remained distant. The empire learned how to wait. By around 500 BCE, Darius extended structure. He measured land, counted people, organized provinces. Satrapies formed. Boundaries became administrative, not cultural. Records multiplied, weights standardized, coinage circulated, gold and silver traveled without displacing barter. The economy layered rather than replaced. Law codes were collected, not unified. Justice varied by region. Oversight remained central. Time became predictable. Tax cycles repeated annually. Labor schedules aligned. The royal road stretched far. Travel was slower than rumor, faster than memory. Information arrived intact. Astronomy continued. Calendars aligned with ritual and administration. Years were counted carefully now, but without haste. Persian kings ruled from distance. They were seen rarely, felt constantly. Armies existed, but remained still. Stability mattered more than expansion. When resistance appeared, it was addressed decisively and then absorbed. The empire functioned as a container for difference. Mesopotamia rested within it. Canals were maintained, fields remained productive, cities retained identity. Babylon no longer ruled, but it endured. By the late 4th century BCE, pressure gathered at the edges. Greek cities stirred. Macedon advanced. The empire held, then loosened. Persia slowed. Time prepared to change hands again. The rivers remained. By the late 4th century BCE, change returned again, as it had many times before, not as disruption, but as movement within continuity. Alexander crossed into Asia during a period already shaped by order. The Persian system did not vanish, it adjusted. Roads remained, records remained. Administrative habits continued without interruption. Armies moved across open land, yet cities held their routines. Markets opened at familiar hours. Temples followed their calendars. Officials remained at their desks. Authority shifted, but structure stayed. Babylon received another ruler, as it had done before. Gates opened. Records were presented. Treasuries were accounted for. Nothing needed to be explained. Alexander entered the city not as an ending, but as continuation. Rituals were observed, offerings were made, the river flowed without notice. Greek language appeared gradually within administration. It did not replace older scripts, it layered beside them. Coins circulated slowly, weights stayed familiar, measures were trusted, names repeated across tablets. Seals changed hands quietly. Settlements formed near older towns, not over them. Markets adjusted. Education expanded without urgency. Daily life remained practical. Fields were planted as they always had been. Canals were cleared at the same times of year. Change occurred above routine, not within it. Alexander moved often, but the land did not move with him. It remained steady. End. Block 2. Authority becoming familiar. 11 labs. As time passed, presence became familiarity. Greek customs appeared in measured ways. Gymnasiums stood near older temples. Theatres appeared near markets. Architecture overlapped without erasing memory. Education expanded slowly. Language diversified. People adapted without instruction. Trade followed familiar routes. Coins changed images. Values remained stable. Authority was visible, but not constant. Officials continued to work. Scribes continued to record. The system absorbed leadership without strain. Alexander's image appeared on currency, then became ordinary. His name was spoken, then repeated, then absorbed into routine. Nothing demanded attention. The river continued to flow. Calendars continued to turn. Time passed evenly. In 323 BCE, Alexander died. The moment passed quietly. What followed was not collapse, but adjustment. Territories were divided. Responsibilities redistributed. Administration slowed. Seleucid rule settled over Mesopotamia gradually. Greek remained a language of record. Local speech remained the language of daily life. Calendars overlapped. Festivals repeated. Temples adapted. Trade continued. Routes stayed active. Markets reopened each morning. Coins changed faces. Measures stayed consistent. Authority remained present, but thinner. Years passed without urgency. Babylon continued as a city of reference, not command. Education persisted. Architecture blended. Memory accumulated quietly. Greek influence became familiar, then ordinary. Nothing required attention. By the 2nd century BCE, new powers approached slowly. From the east, from the west, balance returned. Alexander's name remained, not as structure, but as story. Movement softened into memory. The rivers resumed their rhythm. Time widened again. By the 2nd century BCE, after Alexander had become memory, the land returned to balance, not unity, not conquest, balance. Parthians approached from the east, horse cultures, wide horizons, loose control. They did not seek uniformity. They allowed distance. Cities governed themselves under light supervision. Satraps collected tribute. Local customs remained. Babylon persisted. Seleucia grew nearby. Ctesiphon emerged slowly. No city erased another. They coexisted. Trade widened again. Caravans crossed the plains. Silk arrived quietly. Spices followed. Roads mattered more than walls. Roman influence pressed from the west. Not always present, always implied. Borders shifted without permanence. Sometimes Rome advanced, sometimes it withdrew. Mesopotamia remained in between. This position shaped life. Fortresses appeared along routes, not everywhere, only where passage mattered. Soldiers were visible, but not constant. Daily routines adjusted subtly. Taxes changed hands, coinage shifted designs, but fields still needed water. Irrigation continued. Canals required clearing. No empire relieved that duty. Farmers maintained the land, regardless of who ruled. Languages layered. Aramaic dominated daily speech. Greek persisted in administration. Local tongues endured. Writing multiplied, without uniformity. This period stretched. Decades passed without dramatic transition. Power became background. Life remained foreground. The land learned how to exist without center. By the 1st century CE, Roman legions occasionally crossed eastward. Campaigns occurred. Cities were taken, then returned. Nothing settled permanently. Parthian rule weakened gradually. Internal divisions widened. Yet life continued. Markets opened at dawn, work ended at dusk. Temples remained active, new shrines appeared. Religions multiplied, Zoroastrian practice spread, local cults persisted. Jewish communities expanded, Christian groups formed quietly. Belief diversified without order. Tolerance was practical, uniformity unnecessary. The rivers continued. Flood cycles repeated. Administration adapted again under the Sassanids. By the 3rd century CE, this rule tightened structure, roads repaired, tax systems clarified. Ctesiphon grew into prominence, gardens expanded, courts formalized. Yet even now, authority respected distance. Local autonomy remained essential. Empires here learned restraint. Centuries passed slowly. Conflict occurred, but recovery followed. The land did not collapse. It absorbed. By the 6th century CE, the region was experienced in survival. It had endured Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. What mattered was continuity. Water still flowed, fields still grew grain, memory lived in practice, not monument. This endurance prepared the ground for the next transformation, one that arrived not with armies first, but with words. By the 7th century CE, movement returned again, not as armies at first, as language. Recitation travelled ahead of administration. Words crossed deserts faster than structures. Arabic entered the sound of daily life, not suddenly, gradually. It was heard in camps, at markets, along caravan routes. The rhythm mattered as much as meaning. The land recognized rhythm. Cities adjusted. Older centers did not vanish. They adapted. Ctesiphon remained active. Basra emerged near water. Kufa formed around garrison and prayer. These were not replacements. They were additions. Urban life reorganized quietly. Mosques appeared. Open spaces, courtyards. Orientation mattered. Prayer structured time. Not by command, by repetition. Dawn, midday, afternoon, sunset, night. Time aligned again. Administration followed recitation. Records were kept. Taxes collected. But authority was justified through words, not lineage alone. Law was spoken before it was enforced. This created predictability. People learned expectations. Conversion occurred slowly. Choice mattered. Pressure varied by place and time. Diversity remained. Christians stayed, Jews stayed, older practices continued. Cities layered belief without erasing practice. The rivers did not change course. Irrigation remained essential. Fields were worked by those who stayed and those who arrived. Life remained practical. The land absorbed another system. By the 8th century CE, a new city was placed deliberately. Baghdad, chosen for balance, between rivers, between routes. Its plan was circular, measured, intentional. Power concentrated briefly. Caliphs ruled. Courts expanded. Yet the city's lasting influence was not command. It was gathering. Texts arrived from everywhere. Greek, Persian, Indian. Translation followed. Not rushed, methodical. The house of wisdom formed. Scholars worked quietly, knowledge accumulated without spectacle, mathematics refined, astronomy observed, medicine recorded, sleep was studied, dreams discussed. The body understood as system. This mattered. Learning here was not abstract. It served life. Time was measured more carefully, calendars aligned with prayer. Stillness gained structure. Baghdad glowed at night with lamplight rather than fire. Streets remained active without chaos. Trade flourished. Paper entered circulation. Records multiplied. Memory became lighter. more portable. Yet the land still remembered older ways. Canals required repair, floods required response. No knowledge replaced maintenance. The city prospered because routine held. Centuries passed, Baghdad aged, authority weakened, but learning remained. The land held knowledge as it had held empire, quietly. By the early 20th century, the rivers still moved. Quietly, cities had grown along their banks, bridges appeared, dams followed, canals divided the land, yet water kept its rhythm, fields flooded as they always had, irrigation expanded, harvest followed season, oxen disappeared, machines arrived, but soil still responded to water, to sun, to time. Patterns remained. Villages stayed near the banks. Minarets rose where reeds once stood. Children played in shallow channels. Paths of fishers became roads. Trade routes hardened into levees. Still, the sound of water did not change. Moonlight reflected the same way it always had. Technology measured the rivers. Gauges, pumps, electrical grids. Maps multiplied. Yet the rivers did not hurry. They carried abundance, they carried scarcity, without judgment. Seasons arrived, or did not. Heat pressed the soil, crops succeeded, crops failed, people adapted, as they always had. Ships moved downstream, grain followed current. Electricity travelled lines that curved with water. Modern noise layered itself above an older sound. History settled into sediment. Bricks, ruins, levees, buried. The rivers did not speak loudly. They did not ask to be noticed. They continued. Time moved faster elsewhere. But here, days remained days. Nights remained nights. The rivers kept measure. End. By the mid-20th century, cities expanded again. Baghdad, Basra, Mosul. Names layered over older names. Roads traced paths once made by feet and animals. Beneath them, clay remembered. Farms mechanized, harvest accelerated, yet soil still decided what could grow. Sun mattered, water mattered. Nature remained the quiet authority. Dams rose upstream, water was regulated, floods were managed. Partially, the rivers continued to pulse, borders shifted, nations formed, governments changed, conflict passed, peace followed. The rivers resisted nothing. They carried memory without opinion. Communities adjusted schedules. Irrigation remained routine. Season followed season. Children learned patterns by watching water. Families planted together, harvested together. Modernity layered itself over continuity. Floods left stories in silt. Droughts preserved absence. Archives recorded dates. Instruments measured levels, but the rivers already knew. Buildings replaced mud brick, lights replaced flame, engines replaced hooves. Still, maintenance mattered. Canals needed care, fields needed attention. Even now, the rivers speak quietly. Satellites observe, scientists calculate, farmers anticipate. The rivers respond as they always have. Nothing waits to be guarded except understanding. Nothing asks to be rushed. The rivers remember. Through them, people remember. Now, the rivers carry everything. Noise rests lightly on their surface. Boats drift, children laugh. Water mirrors sky. Memory lies in reeds, in silt, in slow current. Empires rise above it. Languages shift. Technologies change. The rivers continue beneath. People search for beginnings. They search for endings. The rivers do not. They measure presence, repetition, return. Bridges span their width. Electricity hums nearby. Satellites pass overhead. The rivers do not accelerate. They carry centuries and moments together. Flood, drought, action, stillness. Continuity remains. Let the rivers hold memory tonight. What is personal, what is shared. Let land, sky, and water hold what cannot be spoken. Let the silt settle. Let the moon close its eye. Morning will arrive without announcement. Only rest remains, flowing between two rivers that have always been, remembering